Choeje Judang Choeje Jumang La Jangtse Bada Age Jujin Jebe Sunan Jebe Beje Sanje Nuba Saje Judang Choeje Jumang La Jangtse Age Jujin Jebe Sunan Ola Beje Sanje Nuba Saje Judang Choeje Jumang La Jebe Sunan Je Nuba Beje Tazo Majunagi Tadani Bisunja Tawa Jejidun Tajala Kuparam Boji Jineja Tabaja Tichidu.
So we are here today to receive teachings on this text that is called the 37 Practices of Bodhisattvas. It is composed by Gyaltse Tokmen Sampo. It is very important in the beginning to adjust our motivation and attend this event with the right attitude. So, as always in the beginning, we think that I am here in this occasion to receive these profound teachings with the ultimate aim of reaching the state of enlightenment in order to benefit all malice sentient beings who are as vast as the vastness of space. So the text is, as you can see, composed by a practitioner, a holy being, who is called Gyaltse Tokmen Sampo. Tokmen Sampo is his actual personal name, and the word Gyaltse in front of the name is a title that translates as a son of the conqueror. So in other words, a bodhisattva. However, you should not, so actually the word for the son is honorific, almost like the prince or of the conquerors and so forth. By hearing about this title, you should not think that Tokmen Sampo was someone who from the beginning was a very high lama, had a very high status and so forth. He was just a very humble, a very ordinary practitioner who engaged in those practices and composed these texts in order to help beginners, practitioners like ourselves. So when you see the term Gyaltse in front of his name, take it to mean that this refers that he is helping us reach that particular state. So we're talking here about practitioners like ourselves who ideally should be able to carry those practices. So we'll come and attend these teachings in order to listen, to contemplate, and eventually be able to meditate or put into practice these very practices of the Bodhisattvas. In general, it is quite difficult to find someone who will instruct us and says, first you do this, then you do that, then you have to practice that, to give us this detailed presentation of the practice. But here we have the opportunity to receive these teachings, and it is important to receive it with a very strong attitude that says, having received these teachings, from my side, I will do the best I can in this life to develop the mind of Bodhichitta. So in this way, please adjust your motivation for listening.
So Rinpoche mentioned the name of the author, and traditionally what follows after that is to give a presentation of the biography, even a short one. However, Rinpoche has decided today to skip this part and go straight into the presentation of the text. When we look at the way that the text is organized, we see that we have some preliminary verses followed by the actual meaning of the text, which are the actual practices, so the 37 practices of the Bodhisattvas, and at the end we have 4 verses of dedication. So there's virtue at the beginning, then the middle part of virtue, and the end part of dedication of virtue. So it is very important to understand that those 37 practices are, as we call them practices. They are to be put into practice. So if you want to engage in the activities of Bodhisattvas, those 37 practices are extremely important. So starting straight away with our text, we look at the preliminary lines. The first line is actually, although the text is composed in Tibetan, the first line, Namo Lokeshvaraya, is in Sanskrit. We have the translation in English that means homage to Lokeshvara. Now, the reason why at the beginning of the text we find a line composed in Sanskrit is because the author of this text in this way indicates that whatever follows here is not something which is self-fabricated. Rather, it is something that really very closely follows the tradition of the actual speech of the Buddha and the specific valid commentaries of the great beings, the great authors and practitioners in India. So by having the Sanskrit at the beginning, it indicates to the authentic sources of this tradition. Okay, so it, as we say here, we pay homage to Lokeshvara. So Lokeshvara is actually the protector of the world Genrezig, who is the one who personifies the great compassion of all the Buddhas. Beginning the text in this way, to pay homage to Avalokiteshvara, is again a very important type of homage or praise. Starting with the first actual verse, it says, I pay constant homage through my three doors to my supreme teacher and protector Chenrezig, who while seeing all phenomena like coming and going, makes single-minded effort for the good of living beings. So the meaning of the first verse, as we see here, it says, I pay constant homage through my three doors to my supreme teacher and protector Chenrezig. This second line in the English translation indicates that we look at the supreme teacher, who is the root guru, as being inseparable from Chenrezig. So recognizing the guru to be inseparable from Chenrezig, at all times, we pay homage through the three doors of our activities. So this root guru, inseparable from Chenrezig, on one hand, completely sees that all phenomena lack any inherent coming and going, any type of inherent activities, but out of great compassion, always puts great effort to benefit all types of living beings. And this effort is like a single-pointed, driven, focused on sentient beings. So looking more into the meaning of this first verse, it talks about the teacher being inseparable from protector Maitreya and while seeing all phenomena lack coming and going, makes effort for the good of living beings. So these words actually indicates that the guru has a realization of emptiness, and whilst remaining in equipoise on emptiness, at the same time is able to act for the benefit of sentient beings. So by making reference to the fact that the guru remains in equipoise whilst at the same time is active, this really reinforces the message that the guru is inseparable from Chenrezig. So what is the actual purpose of making this point? What is the point of saying that I pay homage to the guru who is inseparable from the deity? Because whatever the reason for that is because whatever progress in our practice we do all depends on how much faith, the amount of faith, large or small, that we have for our guru. And as the great master Naropa has said, without the guru, there will be no Buddha. There will be no Buddhahood. Right. So therefore, it becomes very important that we pray to the guru as being indivisible from the deity. If we see the guru as being different from the deity, if we consider the deity to be more important and so forth, then there will be no progress in our practice. The guru is the one who actually will guide us to reach the state of liberation and omniscience. And these are destinations we have never traveled to before. We have no experience. We do not know how to go there. And therefore, it is very important that we rely upon the guidance and the advice of the Guru. There is a lot of fear in the situation we are in, and the guidance of the Guru is the one who can lead us to a state that is fearless. He guides us in an authentic way through his experience because he has traveled this path and helps us to come across the great ocean of samsara. Therefore, relying on the Guru and praying on the Guru, it is essential. The Lama in our life, in our practice, is extremely kind, someone who's extremely kind and extremely important. And therefore, at the beginning, we always pray to the Guru in this way. So, having completed the first line, we look at the next one, the second verse, where it says, "Perfect Buddha, source of all well-being and happiness, arise from accomplishing the excellent teachings. And this depends on knowing the practices." So I will explain the practices of Bodhisattvas. We talk about all the happiness and well-being in this world. And we say that all of this happiness and well-being actually comes from virtuous activities. And therefore the question is, where do virtuous activities come from? Virtuous activities are initiated or inspired from the Buddha's pristine wisdom, Dharma body. And then the question is, ultimately, where does the Buddha come from? How does someone become a Buddha? Someone becomes a Buddha by relying on the practice, by practicing properly. So if you wish to obtain the state of Buddhahood, you must also practice properly. But to practice properly means that you must follow a path without any mistakes. Right? Your practice should be unerring. And to have an unmistaken path, it means you must come to know, you must come to understand those things. And therefore the author says, since it is important to know these practices, I will explain the practices of the Bodhisattvas. So we have completed the first part, which is the preliminary verses, and now we start with the actual meaning of the text. Again, within the actual meaning of the text, we have three parts. The first part is preliminaries, then we have the actual trainings of the Bodhisattvas, and then we have conclusion. In terms of the preliminaries, the first 7 verses of the actual part consist the preliminaries. The first one is to meditate on the freedoms and endowments. The second one is to give up your household. The third one is to rely on isolation. The fourth one is to let go of this life. The fifth one is to give up bad friends. The sixth one is to cherish your teacher, to rely on the teacher, and number 7 is to take refuge on the 3 jewels. So these, you can see, are the preliminaries, but actually they're very important because they are the foundation of our practices. We begin with the first of those preliminaries, which is to meditate on the freedoms and endowments. Having gained this rare ship of freedom and fortune, hear, think, and meditate unwaveringly night and day in order to free yourself and others from the ocean of cyclic existence. This is the practice of the Bodhisattvas. In order to practice pure Dharma, it is important that we establish a type of rebirth that gives us freedom from 8 oppressive situations. And in addition to this, it is endowed with 10 favorable conditions. So to obtain such type of a human rebirth is extremely rare. It is something that we find only once, and it lasts for a short time. This type of rebirth is a type of rebirth that can help us cross the ocean of cyclic existence. So now that we have found this type of rebirth, it is not appropriate for us to be lazy, but instead we should night and day unwaveringly, without being distracted, engage the teachings. So here we should rely on a fully qualified teacher, listen to what advice they have to give. Having listened to this advice, we should try to comprehend the meaning, and after that we should try to develop wisdom on the meaning of whatever we have understood. So this is the way that we can actually develop and establish some certainty about the teachings, the meaning of the teachings that we have received. But for this to happen, we need to repeatedly meditate, as it says here, day and night, on whatever we have understood. So it is stressed that this is the practice of the Bodhisattvas. Okay, so we have already mentioned how important it is to obtain the precious human rebirth with all the freedoms and endowments. And at the same time, we have said that this is something which is very rare to achieve. It is very rare to achieve because it requires the combination of many causes. First of all, pure ethics must be in place. Second, they must be assisted by the practice of the 6 perfections, such as generosity and so forth. And thirdly, it must be complemented by stainless prayers. Because so many causes are required, it is very difficult to obtain all the causes, to have all the causes in place. And if you don't have the causes in place, this indicates that it will be very difficult to obtain the result. However, in this life, we have come having composed, having got together all of these causes. And therefore, it is important that what we have right now, we do not waste it, but instead we extract the essence. And we extract the essence means we'll be able to practice in a way that we carry us across the ocean of cyclic existence and will be free. Later on, it will be very hard to obtain a life like this because it is very difficult for us to get the causes together. We said the first cause is pure ethics. Having received many initiations, actually we are still unclear about how to keep properly our vows and commitments. And therefore, negativity and downfall is something that we easily accumulate. Therefore, the first one, which is pure ethics, it's very difficult to say that it applies to ourselves. Secondly, we said we need to practice the 6 perfections, such as generosity and so forth. So each one of us individually, if we honestly examine, we can see whether we're actually practicing the 6 perfections or not. And if you are honest in your examination, you will say, well, I'm not actually establishing the causes. And then the third causes was that at the end, we should have stainless prayers. But our prayers are not stainless. Our prayers are all prayers about the benefits of this life. We pray and we dedicate saying, may I have a long life. May I be free of sickness. May I have good health. May I have money. May I be successful. These are the things we pray for. And these are things of this life, preoccupations of this life. And therefore, we can see that it will be very difficult. It's very difficult to establish all these causes. What we have right now, it will be very difficult to replicate it and get it again in the future. And therefore, once we have it now, as it says very diligently, night and day, we should make all the effort to practice properly to free not just ourselves, but also all other sentient beings from the ocean of cyclic existence. Now, as we say, a lot of practice is required, a lot of effort, a lot of dedication. But this actually relies, first of all, on listening. If we do not study, if we do not listen those things, there is no way that we can progress. So listening is like the first steps of the ladder. You cannot go up. You cannot go any further if you don't have this foundation. And once we hear this information by attending the teachings, the next thing is that we need to analyze it. So we take that information and we turn it over in our mind. We turn it in our mind to become more familiar, and we meditate on it. So this is the type of practice we should do. Never separate, but instead always combining the three parts: the listening, the contemplation, and the meditation. So this is the type of a practice that the Bodhisattvas do. And this is what we must promise from today onwards, that we will practice also in this way. We continue with the second of those preliminaries, which is to give up your homeland. Attached to your loved ones, you are stirred up like water. Hating your enemies, you burn like fire. In the darkness of confusion, you forget what to adopt and discard. Give up your homeland. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. So here it talks about giving up the homeland, the place where our parents, our relatives, friends, and so forth live. Because when we are near to them, we develop a strong attachment for the loved ones. And attachment here is said is like the waves of the ocean. At the same time, in the place that we usually grow up, we have people that we dislike, and the hatred towards them is like fire. So with these analogies, the analogy of the ocean, so it says you're like in the water that is constantly stirred up. So this is the waves of the ocean. And we know that in the case of the waves of the ocean, they seem to be unending. So, one wave hits you, and then the next wave hits you, and then the next wave hits you. So this is what happens with attachment. And also with the fires of hatred, it seems that one front of fire comes, and then the next, and then the next. And then, of course, it says here, in the darkness of confusion, we forget what is to be practiced, and we forget what is to be abandoned. So it is very important to distance ourselves from the places that generate strong attachment and strong hatred, because it leads, this association with those places leads to confusion as well. Now, there are actually two types of places that create this, stir up these emotions. One is actually the homeland, the place where your parents live, the place where you grew up. But a second understanding of this is any location or any place which can stir up attachment and hatred and ignorance within you. So it is very important here, the practice, it says very important as the beginning of the practice of the Bodhisattva to leave such a place, to abandon such a place, leave it behind. And it's not enough just to think, I should abandon it, I should walk away. Because once you're thinking this and you remain there, strong attachment and hatred and ignorance continue to afflict you. So you have to actually abandon this place. You have to actually walk away. That's the beginning of the practice. Okay, so we continue with the third preliminary, which is to rely on solitude. We have seen that the second practice outlined was the practice that says that we have to leave behind the homeland. So if we leave behind this place, where do we go? Well, we go into isolation. We go into a quiet place because this is a place that is most conducive to practice. So verse number 3 says, by avoiding bad objects, disturbing emotions gradually decrease. Without distraction, virtuous activities naturally increase. With clarity of mind, conviction in the teachings arises. Cultivate seclusion. This is the practice of the Bodhisattva. If we avoid those bad objects, it means we will not be under the attack of different afflictions such as attachment and hatred. So because we will not be in close contact of the objects that generate these types of afflictions, there will be smaller disturbance in the mind. And therefore, if there is smaller disturbance in the mind, it means that with our 3 doors of activities, we can put more effort into establishing virtue. If we continuously interact and meet with objects that give rise to afflictions, then inappropriate attention and misconceptions will always be generated in our mind. Therefore, it is important for us not to stay close to these objects, but to disassociate, to go as far away as possible, to go a long distance away from these objects. As the great Lama Tsongkhapa says in the 3 principal aspects of the path, towards the end of the text, so it says, having properly understood the main point of the 3 principal aspects, as have been previously explained, my child, go into isolation, and they are practiced sincerely and quickly obtain the state of Buddhahood. So this is actually very clear advice. Once you have come to the point of understanding the essence of the practice, so with a lot of studying and a lot of reflection, once you get to that point of clarity, do not remain in a place where your mind again is going to be distracted. Do not remain in a place that gives continuous rise to affliction and distraction and misconception and so forth. Instead, safeguard that clarity that you got by getting into a quiet place, a place where you do not come in contact with those external faulty conditions. And if you practice properly in this way, you will quickly progress along the path. You will generate naturally, your virtuous activities will increase, your conviction to the teaching will arise, and so forth. So the mind will become clearer, your misconception will decrease, and then you will progress in the practice. So, as it says, this is the practice of the Bodhisattvas. The next practice after cultivating solitude is to let go of this life. So verse number 4, loved ones who have long kept company will part. Wealth created with difficulty will be left behind. Consciousness, the guest, will leave the guest house of the body. Let go of this life. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. We know that no matter how many friends and relatives and people that are close to us we might have in this life, naturally when we come at the end of this life, we will be separated. And as for the wealth that we have amassed with so much difficulty, and in the process we accumulated so much negativity, even that wealth we have amassed will be of no benefit at the time of death. There will be no profit really from this wealth, because this is something that has to be left behind. And even our own body, which at the moment houses our consciousness, the body that is like a guest house, and the consciousness that is like the guest, even that body we have to leave behind, and we have to move on into our next rebirth. We all understand about death and impermanence. We all understand what happens at the end of this life. So knowing that this is what will come at the end of the life is much more beneficial to let go of this life from now whilst we are still alive, but to do that sincerely. This is the practice of the Bodhisattvas. So the verse here says that we have to give up this life. So what does it mean actually to give up this life? Does it mean that we have to give up everything that supports this life, everything that we enjoy in this life? For example, our food, our clothes, our accommodation, and so forth. Is this what the advice is? Actually, the advice is that we should give up attachment or craving for all these possessions or all those things in this life. We can use them to support our life, but use them without attachment. So, as the text says, do not have attachment for this life, for the possessions of this life. Instead, make the effort for your next life. The next preliminary, number 5, is to give up bad friends. Verse number 5, when you keep their company, your 3 poisons increase. Your activities of hearing, thinking, and meditating decline, and they make you lose your love and compassion. Give up bad friends. This is the practice of Bodhisattva. So there are certain type of people that when we affiliate with them, somehow they cause our afflictions to increase. Our attachment, our hatred, the 3 poisons, our ignorance increase. And at the same time, our practice of pure Dharma declines. So all the hearing, the study, the reflection, the meditation, all of those Dharma activities decline. We even lose our love, our compassion, our bodhicitta. And therefore, it is a Mahayana practice to give up those bad friends. The reason why this advice is given is because as beginners, our mind is not very stable. And therefore, if we associate with the wrong type of people, then they have very bad influence on us. So whatever are their faults, eventually will become our faults as well. Like it will affect the way that we behave, the way that we practice, and so forth. As Kongtang Rinpoche said, when there are certain people whose behavior is very negative, and you should avoid these people like the plague, right? So as if, like the same way that we avoid a really bad disease, in the same way we should avoid this type of people, because when we associate with them, our afflictions will increase, our practice of study, contemplation, meditation will decline, and we will even lose our love and compassion and so forth. So it is the practice of the Bodhisattva to avoid this type of people. Having given the advice that we should give up bad friends, then the next preliminary, the next practice, is to actually rely on good friends. So good friends here refers to the spiritual friends, to our teachers. Number 6, when you rely on them, your faults come to an end, and your good qualities grow like the waxing moon. Cherish spiritual teachers, even more than your own body. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. When we rely upon the spiritual teacher, our afflictions and the faults that come from these afflictions stop. Our good qualities increase every day, the same way that the waxing moon increases every day. And therefore, it is very important practice of the Bodhisattvas to rely on the spiritual teachers and cherish them more than your own body. So, since beginningless time, we actually have the tendency to come under the influence of afflictions. So when we meet with bad friends, with those who have bad influence upon us and cause our afflictions to arise and increase and so forth, we have no difficulty following these people. And then when we meet with a spiritual friend who is a good friend, who is actually giving us advice and says, please don't do this, please don't behave in this way, this is a mistake, don't do that. So when we hear this type of advice, we actually develop strong dislike. And the dislike comes to the point where we start seeing fault at the spiritual friend, at the teacher, isn't it? So at this point, it is very important, as the advice that comes from previous Lama says to us that we must generate pure view towards the teacher. And having generated pure view towards the teacher, we do not see faults in the teacher. We rely properly through action and attitude, and we practice exactly as they tell us. So the advice is that we should give up all mistaken appearance that appear as if they were true, but they're actually misleading pseudo appearances, and really rely on the spiritual teacher who is the root of all benefit. So the next preliminary, number 7, is taking refuge in the three jewels. Verse number 7, bound himself in the jail of cyclic existence, what worldly God can give you protection? Therefore, when you seek refuge, take refuge in the three jewels, which will not betray you. This is the practice of the Bodhisattva. So in our case, we find ourselves in the prison of cyclic existence, driven there through karma and afflictions. And when we find ourselves in a situation like this, we ask the question, who can give me some protection from this situation? Any worldly God cannot actually act as protection, because themselves they are also within samsara. The only ones who can actually give us protection are the very three special objects of refuge, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. They give us protection because they are totally undeceiving. So it says here they will not betray you, because they have reached the state of non-abiding nirvana, which is completely free from all the fears of pacification and personal peace. We have completed the presentation of the 7 preliminaries. Having completed the preliminaries, we begin with the actual part of the text, and this is organized in 3 sections. It presents the practices of the individual of the small scope, the middle scope, and the great scope. We begin with practices shared with the individual of the small scope, with verse number 8. That says, the subduer said, all the unbearable suffering of bad rebirths is the fruit of wrongdoing. Therefore, even at the cost of your life, never do wrong. This is the practice of Bodhisattvas. When we look at the suffering of the lower migrations, the unbearable heat and cold of the hells, the hunger and the thirst of the hungry ghosts, and the lack of intelligence of the animals, we understand that these types of suffering are results of certain causes. These things do not arise causelessly, like haphazardly. The Buddha has said again and again that these are the results of negative actions. Therefore, it is important for us to avoid all negativity, even at the cost of our life. This is the practice of all the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, because not only do they aspire to be free of the suffering of cyclic existence personally, they want to liberate all other sentient beings from the suffering of cyclic existence. Okay, so we can see here that we talk about the unbearable suffering, and a lot of fear must arise from this. And we understand that this type of suffering are the results that come from non-virtue and negativity. And the correct conclusion is that we want to abandon all this negativity and non-virtue. In the presentation of the small scope, first of all, we talk about the precious human rebirth, and then after this, we talk about death and impermanence. Once we introduce death and impermanence, the next thing is that we consider that consciousness will, after the time of death, consciousness will have to continue in another type of rebirth. And there are only 2 options in terms of rebirth. There is a good rebirth and there is a bad rebirth. So a bad rebirth in the lower migrations, in the hells, as a hungry ghost, as an animal, and so forth, is a type of rebirth that is characterized by very intense suffering. So we have fear towards that suffering, and at the same time, we have great faith and conviction that the three jewels have the power to protect us. And with these two attitudes, the fear and the faith, we go for sincere refuge, like from the bottom of our heart, with total conviction into the three jewels, and we follow the advice of the refuge.
Sangye Shindo Mende Pubo Ye Drogo Nanda Jeboro Sho Guje Rabden Je Nangara Time Shuju Losan Dembe Deme Sasum Ge Dwe Muzeta Yenguru Je Guru Ranam Ami Yanda Yo Menda Kadayamba Ganshi Saba de Lome Mari Gidonjo Namde Jave Wombo Dagyoje Dema Sebe Chera Kund Ladan Jesu Ne Jebe Nibe Luwa Jebe Tabgege Dove Yike Mela Sanjene Temba Rinche Choeje Majamba Kyabje Nyambra Jebe Sun Ninje Chenpo Yira Kweba Ye Pende Tede Seje Jave Mejo Chenla Na Leje Rinbe So Zambe Chenla